SDGs in a Capsule. I'm Dr. Noran Mitra, Founder Director of Sustainable Advancements OPC Private Limited. Today we have with us Meeta Sengupta, who would enlighten us on the SDG 4 that aims to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. Now, who is Meeta Sengupta? Meeta Sengupta, Frsa, board member and founder investor, is a writer, speaker, and advisor on education with cross-country perspective on policies, skills, and pedagogies. She has written extensively on school systems and impact pedagogies and processes, assessments and outcomes, teachers and leaders, and so on.
Hi, and thank you very much, Nayan Mitra, for inviting me to this wonderful conversation with Sustainable Advancements on SDG 4, which is about inclusive, equitable, and quality education. One of the most important conversations today, because it is education that lays the foundation of the next few decades. And if you do not have both universal and quality education, honestly, what will students who grow up with bad quality education grow up and achieve? The world of tomorrow is going to be created literally by getting SDG 4 right. Getting SDG 4 right is about better futures and better decisions and better choices for all of us. And if you allow me to pun on the word sustainable slightly, then it is simply about a world that sustains enough for us to survive. We do not get quality education right, we do not survive as a species. And we have reached that point in our history where it is literally that choice. So this is why I'm very glad to be talking about quality education in India. And when we talk about quality education in India, I'd like to talk about it in three different segments. What was happening, and that is the universalization idea, which was part of the MDG before this as well. And we have to admit that India has done quite well in universalizing education. We have a very large number of our students in school, at least in primary school, even though dropout rates remain an issue. In terms of inclusion on gender, we have a fairly good progress that has been made. In terms of ability, we have systems that are in place that are not necessarily so good. In terms of transgender education, for example, that is clearly stated in our new education policy, and we are well on our way to building that bit of inclusion as well. So as the good news here is the will exists to move beyond the Millennium Development Goal of inclusion and universalization to specifically inclusion of those who had been left out. So that brings us to the second phase of understanding quality. And the definition of quality in India, and I had a bit of a personal dispute with that because of the way the MDGs and SDGs were structured, India had insisted that universalization, bringing students into school, was more important than delivering quality education. Whereas my point of view was, if you do not deliver quality education, then why would students join school? Nobody is going to join school for substandard education. Nobody is going to join, or at least enjoy school or engage with school, if it doesn't bring meaning into their lives, or it doesn't bring a higher value added into their earning capacity. And that is what quality also delivers, not just a citizenship and choice, but also a greater earning capacity. So quality education, thankfully, was therefore the focus of the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think India has been working really hard to improve that. And the third part of it, of course, is the impact of COVID as we sit here in 2020, where sadly much of the quality gains that we had achieved in the past 2 years are slipping away from us dramatically because online education is a new pedagogy that does not necessarily deliver the same quality outcomes, the same quality connect and care, the same quality of consistency. nor does it actually serve those who do not have access to devices and the internet. So the inclusion and equitability goals of SDG 4 have suffered dramatically for 6 months now already during COVID-19, and will possibly continue to suffer for another year. So we may actually slip back by 4 or 5 years in our quality goals. Fact remains that education in India across the past decade has worked very hard to include universalization. In fact, that was the first part of the MDGs as well, to include universalization as its goal. And fortunately or unfortunately, they saw quality as a separate goal. As an educator, I cannot see how you can separate quality from quantity in education, because if you deliver good quality, that's when people will come to you. Whereas the official stance was, bring them to school first, get them into the habit of being in school, and then we will fix the quality problem as we go along. Fine, that's the official approach, and that is what has been worked upon. Our gender numbers are also not bad at all in India. In fact, girls and boys compete at least up to the class 10 level, which is the first school leaving level. That's what you need to pass in order to, say, apply for a driving license. Girls and boys pretty much achieve really, really well. In fact, girls topping exams is something that has happened fairly typically in India. Girls tend to do better in exams, at least at the margin, than boys. The number of girls that do better than boys is, of course, not necessarily the same. Not necessarily the same. So the quality part of what is happening is currently is not exactly the same thing as the aggregate numbers. Now, when we talk about quality education, quality is something that needs to show through in two things. One, in outcomes, and second, in the quality of the expenditure as well. So not just in learning outcomes, but also in expenditure outcomes. And I'll tell you why I'm talking about these separately. One of the big shifts that has happened in India in understanding quality is the shift from moving from inputs into education to outcomes in education. So instead of measuring how many teachers we have, how many schools we have, how many textbooks were printed, well, you can have a bunch of resources, but if they're not used well, then and they don't actually translate into learning outcomes, you really have not achieved much in terms of quality. And one of the biggest resources actually has come from the private sector, and that's the ASER report, which now has extended to other countries. It started in India. The ASER report, the ASER report, which basically measures whether you're a student or in a village. It doesn't actually test for whether the student is performing well, but it says whether the system in a local area is delivering to outcomes or not. And unfortunately, over the years, year upon year, we have found that students, in terms of their output, are lagging by at least 2 years of learning, if not more. Also, we find that literacy often precedes numeracy when it comes to formal learning systems. And literacy, therefore, is given inordinate importance in the system, whereas numeracy, or the ability to find meaning in a text, the ability to comprehend the text, and the ability to actually apply what you're learning in a usable manner, is not something that is delivered by a traditional numbers-driven system. And why is that a problem? It's a problem, of course, because the outcomes are not achieved, as far as we just evidenced with the ASER report. But from my point of view, I think it's also a problem because if you do not deliver to sensible outcomes, what is the incentive for students to actually come to school? School will make no sense to them if it's simply rote learning of the letters of the alphabet or rote learning of a series of facts, etc. Till you know that you're actually learning this fancy language because one day some contractor is going to cheat you out of something. Or if you know you're learning these numbers so that when you go to collect your minimum wage or maximum wage, whatever you have been able to earn, somebody may miscount it, may make a mistake, and this is where your accuracy is going to give you power to be able to claim what you have actually earned. Your literacy, your numeracy are tools that are going to make your life better in every respect. So till those outcomes are made visible both to students and parents, I am not even convinced that the motivation to engage with deeper learning will exist. So the shift to outcomes uh, in the early stages yet, we're only 4 or 5 years into it, I think has been an incredible support system to achieving SDG 4. I think the journey is clearly well on its way to when it comes to the quality of expenditure. I think we still have a huge and very complex journey ahead of us, because first we have in India the budgets for public education have been going down year on year, especially when you count inflation, of course, have been going down year on year. The other part of it is the quality of the spend. So when you speak to experts who have run projects in the States, who have run outcome improvement projects in the States, they are fairly clear that if you spend the money better, you still, with less money or with that same pot of money, you can actually achieve better learning outcomes. So it's not just about spending more money. It's not just about asking for, say, 6% of the GDP, which has been the ask for at least 20 years. We're still hanging around the 2.83% of GDP in terms of spend for the public sector in education. Even if we are at the 3.5% level of GDP spend, we should be using that money smarter. We should be able to use that money in more evidence-driven ways of designing our public school systems, evidence-driven ways of designing our pedagogy, our delivery systems, and of upgrading our teachers in order to deliver relevant and usable outcomes out here. So the quality of the spend is really going to be key to achieving SDG 4 or being well on our way to achieving SDG 4. And in a way, that is still the hidden dialogue in the education space. There are other parts of the SDG 4 space that have received a huge amount of attention, especially in the new education policy. For example, teacher training. The teacher training part of it is absolutely critical. In fact, many people strongly believe that your education system is only as good as the teacher you can provide to the student. You cannot, if you have a bad teacher, there is no way the student can learn more than what the teacher knows. This, of course, can be disputed at the margins, but definitely nobody can dispute the fact that the quality of the teacher matters. In fact, now that for a small percentage, 30 to 40% of the population, we have moved to online learning, even that simply makes the fact that the teacher is critical to the learning journey. Even in the most elite rich schools, the most selective schools, even if you select your students, your outcomes will still depend upon the teacher. So the primacy of the teacher in the education ladder, the fact that the teacher sits at the fulcrum of the process, and without the teacher, nothing can progress, has been absolutely established now. So what does the NEP do for the teacher? Firstly, it needs to find, and it does find, that the number of vacancies in the public sector in education have been absolutely distressing. The only word for it is distressing. The fact that many teachers have not been paid on time across many states is also distressing. The fact that every teacher who actually is in place in the public system is very well educated actually, and does understand both child psychology, does understand their subject, does understand pedagogies and delivery, is very heartening. So there are states that have tried to work with their teachers to improve learning outcomes, and they are beginning to show positive results. So the fact remains again that teachers themselves will tend to lapse in a way that has been seen in poor teacher attendance in many states. In fact, at one point of time, the number of teacher absentees was pointed at 71%, and then of course there was pushback on that data. And one of the critical problems in India is we do not have very good quality data in education. So that underlies everything I say, of course. We really don't know much of what is happening. But so the teacher absenteeism issue, even if teacher absenteeism is between 30 and 50%, and then you have a large number of teacher vacancies, you do know that the teachers are physically not present in the classrooms, and you need to work on teachers to enable them to be there in the classrooms. I was trying to avoid the word motivate them to be in the classroom, but definitely a large part of the success has been by activating teachers because they know that their teaching actually matters. So that gentle atrophy that was happening in teacher motivation or teacher learner engagement, in fact even teacher engagement, is something that India has proved in 2 or 3 states that it can be reversed, which again has to be a positive for meeting SDG 4 in the future, because now that 2 or 3 states have been able to provide that precedent, others know that there are these tools that they have to hand to replicate it. And in fact, the replication process is well underway over here. Coming back to the NEP, the pathway to entering the teacher profession has been tightened. For years, there's been a very, again, distressing number of not so valid schools that provide teacher training and education and certification. And that has, and then there was a Supreme Court ruling that basically put a stop to the bad businesses in place that were churning out teachers. And now with the NEP recommendation of a 4-fold pathway of training teachers really well, for example, if after class 12, an individual decides that, straight after K-12 that is, an individual decides that they want to be a teacher, they can straight away enter a 4-year B.Ed program. And then there are other options. If you've already done 3 years of undergraduate schooling, all you need is a 1-year top up. So the options to be a qualified teacher have been defined so much better, and that make it so much better for students who discover teaching versus those who know that they definitely were made for teaching. And that makes a huge difference, because in India, teaching was often seen as the last profession, something that fits your lifestyle, something that is, let me use the word as patronizingly as it has been in the past, something that's good for women, because after all, they have to go home and cook the lunch and feed their children and look after their families, since teaching naturally is the last profession. It is a profession of convenience. Absolutely not. Teaching is a very dedicated profession. It is not something you do on the side. Even the best of teachers who manage to overwork themselves and who have families to look after do manage to do a lot of their pastoral care on the phone in the evenings, do a lot of lesson preparation, do a lot of lesson marking in their private time. It is not something that you can do in 4 or 5 hours of the day. It's not something you dip in and out of. So again, recognition of teaching as a profession, and I think much more work needs to be done on this, on the professionalizing of it. Is definitely going to impact the SDG 4, and the NEP already talks about continuous professional development in the form of upskilling teachers into the new paradigms of going beyond rote learning. The entire focus of the NEP has been on going beyond rote learning, and it recognizes that teachers themselves need to be upgraded to deliver this better quality learning for meaning and mastery, because there are three levels of learning that are possible. You can teach for measurement. Rote learning does that very effectively. But teaching for meaning takes much more work, and teaching for mastery is something only expert teachers can do. And that gradation of teacher training is something that will actually activate the achievement of SDG 4. The interesting things about SDG 4, especially in India, is the engagement of the private sector in quality education. And while it has been noted that the quality of teachers is significantly better in government schools, in the public sector schools, it has also been noted, and I will quote the ASA report in this, it has also been noted that the quality of output, the quality of outcome in the private sector has been far, far better. The ASA report is conducted only in rural areas. And the sentence that I will quote over here, and I'm reading off this right now, of 6-year-olds in class 1, nearly 42% of those in private schools could read words in comparison to only 19% in government schools. So this is not only about rich private schools achieving better. Of course, there are fantastic private schools with great resources, with selective admission, that produce excellent quality education in India. And that is probably the top 5% of the continuum. But again, quoting from the CSF report on private schools right now, we know that 50% of our schools in India are in the private sector. Of them, roughly 49 point something, which is another half of those schools, are from the budget private sector. And they have defined the budget private sector at 500 rupees or less of fees. That is really, really little, very, very little. I have been defining budget private sector at double that fees, but at 500 rupees, it's less than the cost of a decent pair of slippers, footwear. Or it's 2 basic pairs of footwear for a family. And at that price, they are able to deliver a fairly high quality of education. And the way they do that is not by having quality teachers. In fact, the RTE Act says that they need to hire teachers who are qualified and who are paid a certain amount of money. Not all of them are able to do it. Not all of them are able to demonstrate that they are able to deliver to those RTE standards. But what actually happens is that the teacher is present in the classroom. Teacher absenteeism is very, very rare in the private sector. The engagement of the parent and the teacher and the school and the curriculum, that engagement is very high, which means the child actually gets fourfold attention. And that kind of attention and focus on outcomes is something that the private sector would do very well to share with the public sector. The private sector also is something that, again, evidence of choice is there for the private sector, both in rural and urban areas. 2 things have been noticed. One, in order to access better quality education, quality defined as marks in exams, of course, for a very limited definition of quality education, students have been moving from the public sector schools, from government schools, to the private sector. At one point of time, the rate of attrition was seen as high as 25%. In times of recession, where there isn't enough money to pay the private sector fees, what is noticed is that boys are sent to the private sector schools and girls are sent to the public schools, thereby reflecting that where you see economic viability, where you see quality education, is where you're going to invest as a parent. A lot of these factors build into the entire SDG 4 story for India, where the private sector operates on different parameters. The private sector operates on different definitions, in fact, fairly utilitarian definitions of quality, not the entire gamut of a quality education, and delivers to the very basic needs. I will also add something that is not respected much in the country, but the entire tuition culture. It's a multi-billion-dollar business in the country, both at a personal, at a physical level and in the edutech industry. Most of the edutech industry in India is about exam preparation. So that's not necessarily an education thing, but they definitely are there to deliver better outcomes. Now, it's not certain that commercial tuitions deliver poor value or only rote learning. In fact, many parents have reported that in commercial tuitions, the teacher explains better. In commercial tuitions, my child gets better attention. In commercial tuitions, if the teacher does not deliver value, quality education to my child, I can simply stop paying the monthly fee and shift my child to another tutor. The kind of choice and flexibility that lead to better quality education are actually available more in the tuition sector, because you're not bound to one supplier over there. And the same thing applies to the edutech sector. If they do not provide quality in whatever they're delivering, they will simply see a loss of custom. So there is a very interesting dynamic going on over here about visible utilitarian parts of the quality spectrum, which are subscribed to by people who have choice and are willing to spend money on that, and the invisible elements of the quality spectrum that are delivered, both possibly delivered in many government schools, but they definitely do not carry visible value, and are definitely delivered by the high-end rich schools, what they call the hidden curriculum. And as educators, we understand that. And I think the challenge for SDG 4 is to create a pathway between the private sector and the public sector to be able to extend and understand this concept of quality, not necessarily in ways that can even be measured, but definitely in ways that can create change in the learning structures for better engagement and for better mastery of the subjects, which again is a very large part of the new education policy. Though the new education policy very clearly says they are anti-commercialization, so far as to say that the purpose of regulation is to get rid of commercialization. I think a more mature view would be to learn from commercial entities where they are delivering quality and incorporate that into the mainstream system as well. So there is so much to be learned in transitions, I would say. So in summary, I would like to say that there are two parts of SDG 4 achievement, of achieving quality education, that deserve attention. One is engagement, and that means engagement along the value chain of education, from the resources that you provide, the infrastructure that you provide, the kind of engagement you have with teachers, the engagement in school clusters, the engagement of shared resources. So engage deeper with each of the elements, and engage deeper with connecting the dots of fairly difficult to find data that we have, but with deeper engagement, we can still create value out of this. And the second thing that we really need to understand better to deliver quality is transitions. When a student transitions from early years to middle school, transitions from middle school to high school, transitions from high school to college, managing those transitions, managing transitions along the value chain of education that we just discussed, and managing transitions also in terms of the quality of expenditure. So how does one, for example, there's a very clear report that says that while money is allocated by January, that is the end of the school year, and money needed to be allocated in March or April for the textbooks and the class resources to be bought. So how did that transition of money to outcomes or policy to practice work out? Managing transitions is the second key to getting the SDG 4 right. We still have hope despite the COVID slippage. Engagement, transitions, and we will still be on the way to quality education for all. So thank you again, Nayan, for bringing this very important conversation to the table.
Pleasure, Meeta. It was fantastic listening to you. India has its own dynamics, which is so different from the rest of the world. And you have been working in this sector for so many years. Thank